When a woman finally steps back from a dynamic where she's been emotionally available, supportive, and constantly trying to make things work, something profound happens inside a man. It's not dramatic at first. It's not even conscious. It starts quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the moment you walk into a room and realize a scent you've always taken for granted is suddenly gone. That subtle absence begins a process of reflection that no amount of conversation, explanation, or emotional effort could ever trigger. Because as long as you were there, calling, checking in, smoothing over misunderstandings, he never had to confront what your presence meant. He just lived inside the comfort of it. Men don't usually wake up to the value of someone while that value is still accessible. Most people don't. We're wired to notice meaning in its withdrawal. And in relationships, this is even more intense. When you stop being as available, when you stop waiting for replies, when you stop rearranging your life to fit into spaces he isn't even trying to open for you, you ignite a psychological shift he can't ignore. Suddenly, he's left alone with the silence you used to fill, the energy you used to bring, the emotional certainty he relied on, often without acknowledging it. And it's in that silence that clarity begins. Because it doesn't matter how casually he treated you, how distracted he was, or how indifferent he acted, your absence disrupts something familiar in his emotional landscape. It interrupts his pattern. It forces him to face the truth he avoided, that the connection he assumed would always be there is no longer within reach. And for many men, that shock is the wake-up call they never expected but desperately needed. What makes this shift so powerful is that you're not doing anything manipulative. You're not performing. You're not punishing him. You're simply removing your energy from a place where it was not being honored. And in doing that, you reveal to him the gravity of what he's been losing. A partner who cared, who tried, who invested beyond what she received. Your absence becomes the mirror that shows him his own contribution or lack of it with brutal honesty. This is why men fall harder when the woman finally lets go, because letting go isn't just about walking away. It's about breaking his illusion that he had all the time in the world. It confronts him with the reality that attention is not guaranteed, love is not indefinitely renewable, and patience has limits. Most importantly, it makes him reckon with the simple truth that he mistook your consistency for permanence. And here's the part people often underestimate. The moment you pull back is the moment he starts to remember and miss everything he once overlooked. The softness in your tone, the way your presence changed the room, the reassurance he never thanked you for, the depth he thought he could replace but now realizes he can't. That absence becomes louder than anything you ever said. So when you step back, you're not just creating distance, you're creating space for truth, space for him to realize what you brought into his life, space for him to feel the impact of losing it. And in that space, he finally sees you clearly. Not because you demanded it, but because your absence revealed what your presence made possible. Letting go isn't weakness, it's clarity. And it's often the moment that makes a man fall hardest because it's the first time he truly understands what he was holding. There's something fascinating that happens when a woman stops over-giving, stops over-explaining, and stops trying to compensate for the emotional gaps a man is leaving. It changes the entire dynamic, not because she suddenly becomes cold or distant, but because she stops carrying the relationship on her back. And when that happens, a man is forced to confront a truth he's been avoiding. He was relying on her effort to sustain a connection he wasn't fully investing in himself. What most people don't understand is that emotional overgiving doesn't just drain you, it shields the other person from having to step up. As long as you're initiating the deep conversations, as long as you're smoothing over conflicts, as long as you're the one bridging the distance, he never has to feel the discomfort that comes from recognizing his own lack of effort. He can lean back and feel secure because you're always leaning forward. But the moment you stop doing that, the moment you let the connection rest on its actual foundation, his contribution becomes visible. And for many men, that's when the panic sets in, because it's in that moment he recognizes how much of the emotional glue came from you. It's not that he didn't care, it's that he never realized how much you were quietly holding together until you stopped holding it. This shift is powerful because it removes the illusion. When you step back, he's forced to meet you where you are instead of expecting you to always come to him. And that shift in balance reveals more about his true feelings than anything he could say out loud. If he cares, he'll move, he'll reach out, he'll close the distance, and he will do it with intention because he suddenly understands what was slipping through his fingers. But if he doesn't step forward, if he lets the distance widen, then your stepping back didn't create the problem. It exposed it. It showed you the truth that was always there, but was hidden under your effort. That realization alone can save you from months, sometimes years of emotional frustration. When a woman finally stops overgiving, she's not playing a game. She's not manipulating. She's simply choosing balance. She's stepping into a dynamic where her energy is met rather than drained. And that balance is exactly what makes a man fall harder, because for the first time, he feels the weight of what she brought into his life, and the fear of losing it becomes real. This is why so many men come back with more clarity after a woman stops trying, not because they suddenly changed, but because they finally had space to feel, space to notice, space to miss what they took for granted. A man can't appreciate what he never had to work for, but he will never forget what he realizes he can no longer take from you without giving something back. And that's the deeper truth beneath this dynamic. When you stop carrying everything, you give him the chance to show up or step out. Either way, you move toward a relationship built on truth rather than imbalance. And sometimes the strongest form of love you can offer to him and to yourself is the courage to stop giving more than you receive and see who rises to meet you. One of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships is the moment a woman stops fighting for someone who won't meet her halfway. People often assume her silence means she's given up, that she no longer cares, or that she's become cold. But that silence is usually the result of months, sometimes years, of emotional effort that went unrecognized. And when she finally stops trying, something profound happens. The man who once took her presence for granted is confronted with the weight of her absence. What many men don't realize is that women rarely let go all at once. They let go gradually, silently, emotionally, long before they ever walk away physically. They detach in small increments. They stop correcting the things he does that hurt them. They stop initiating meaningful conversations. They stop repeating the same needs because they've accepted that he isn't listening. And while he may not notice these changes immediately, the emotional climate starts shifting. The air between them becomes lighter for her, heavier for him. There's a psychological reason for that. A woman's emotional labor often acts like a cushion in the relationship. It absorbs conflict, softens tension, and fills the gaps left by a partner who's inconsistent or inattentive. When she pulls back, that cushion disappears. Suddenly, the reality of the relationship hits with full force. Every ignored message, every half-hearted plan, every lukewarm gesture is no longer covered by her effort. He has to feel the consequences of his contribution or his lack of contribution. This is the moment where the imbalance becomes impossible for him to avoid. Something inside him wakes up. He starts replaying old conversations, the ones he brushed off. He remembers the things she used to do, the texts, the check-ins, the emotional availability, and he realizes they weren't small after all. They were the structure holding the connection together, and without her effort, he feels the void. Men often fall harder at this stage because they are finally exposed to the emotional investment they once took for granted. They're no longer responding to the woman he thought she was, someone endlessly available, endlessly forgiving. They're responding to the woman she has become, someone who respects herself enough to stop begging for what she deserves. That shift, even though it's subtle, forces him to evaluate what he's losing. But here's the deeper truth. She didn't let go because she wanted him to chase her. She let go because she realized she was chasing a version of the relationship that only she was committed to. And ironically, that's what makes him feel more for her now than he ever did before. Her detachment introduces scarcity, not the manipulative kind, but the natural kind that appears when someone finally protects their peace. And that scarcity makes him reevaluate everything, his behavior, his role, his feelings, his future. He feels the regret not just of losing her, but of losing the version of himself that he could have become if he had shown up differently. The lesson in all of this is simple but powerful. Your absence can teach a man what your presence never could. And sometimes the only way to reveal someone's true feelings is by no longer giving them unlimited access to your heart. Your detachment isn't an ending. It's the beginning of clarity. There's a moment in every relationship dynamic where a man realizes something he never expected. He's no longer the center of her emotional world. And it's not because she's trying to teach him a lesson or because she's playing some strategic game. It's because she's finally begun redirecting her energy back into herself. This shift is subtle at first, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but its impact is enormous. It's the point where she stops making him the emotional reference point for her decisions, her moods, and her expectations. What makes this so powerful is that men often don't appreciate the emotional investment a woman gives until it's no longer being offered. When she stops seeking validation from him, he feels the absence of that attention more intensely than he ever felt its presence. It's a paradox. The things he used to overlook become the very things he starts craving. The warmth he once took as a given now feels like a privilege he hasn't earned. And this shift is not rooted in manipulation. It's rooted in self-respect. There's also a psychological recalibration happening. When a woman's identity begins to evolve beyond her attachment to him, she becomes more magnetic, not less. Her emotional availability is no longer automatic. Her presence is no longer guaranteed. He senses that she's no longer waiting for him to be everything he promised he could be. Instead, she's becoming the woman she needed herself to be long before she ever met him. And that growth, that independence, that emotional maturity, it creates a gravitational pull he can ignore. Men fall hardest when they realize a woman's world does not collapse without them. It's not the drama, the pleading, or the confrontation that wakes them up. It's the calm, the quiet, the way she stops explaining herself, stops reopening old conversations, stops trying to convince him of her worth. She isn't cold. She's simply done performing emotional labor for someone who didn't value it. That calm unsettles him in ways anger never could, because in that calm, he sees something he never saw before. He can lose her. And not because another man is stepping in, but because she's stepping into a life where she genuinely doesn't need him to complete it. That realization cuts deeper than jealousy. It touches something more vulnerable, his sense of importance, his desire to be chosen, his belief that he had unlimited access to her heart. And here's where the dynamic becomes even more profound. When she stops centering him, he begins centering her. When she stops chasing the relationship, he starts chasing the reality of what she brought into his life. Her independence doesn't push him away. It forces him to confront a question he's been avoiding. Was he showing up as the man she deserved, or was he coasting on the comfort of her devotion? That's why this moment becomes a turning point. Her shift doesn't just change the relationship, it changes him. It challenges him to rise or to lose, to step forward or step out. And the truth is simple. The moment a woman stops making him the center of her world is the moment he finally sees her value. And if he's smart, he won't wait until she's gone to respect it. When a woman finally lets go, something almost paradoxical happens in the mind of a man. Clarity arrives, and it arrives with a kind of force he didn't anticipate. Because as long as she was there, emotionally available, constantly trying, constantly giving him just one more chance, he didn't have to think too deeply. He didn't have to question his own behavior or confront the ways he took her presence for granted. Comfort has a way of numbing awareness, but when that comfort disappears, awareness turns sharp. What he begins to see, often for the first time, is the gap between who he thought he was in the relationship and who he actually showed up as. And that gap becomes uncomfortable. It becomes humbling. It becomes the mirror he avoided looking into for far too long. Men don't usually have these realizations in the middle of conflict or dramatic conversations. They have them in the silence that follows her absence. It's in the quiet moments when no one is demanding anything from him that he suddenly notices how empty it feels without her energy anchoring his life. This is where accountability begins to surface, and not the kind of accountability that comes from guilt or fear, but the kind that comes from an internal reckoning. He starts to recognize the patterns he dismissed, the emotional shortcuts he took, the effort he promised but never delivered. He starts to think about the times she communicated her needs, not with anger but with hope, and how comfortably he let that hope fade without stepping up. And the truth is, most men don't grow because someone tells them to. They grow because they lose something they assumed would always be there. Her letting go forces him to face his own emotional limitations. It reveals the places where immaturity, ego, or complacency held him back from being the partner he could have been. And once he sees that truth clearly, he can't unsee it. That awareness becomes a kind of emotional friction. It starts to shape him. It makes him reconsider the way he shows up, not just with her, but in every relationship afterward. What's powerful about this shift is that it doesn't require her to punish him, lecture him, or convince him of anything. Her growth becomes his lesson. Her boundaries become his wake-up call. Her absence becomes his teacher. He doesn't miss just her presence. He misses the chance to be the version of himself he now realizes he was capable of becoming. And this regret is different from the regret of losing someone temporarily. It's the regret of realizing he wasted the opportunity to rise when it mattered. But here's what makes it transformative. The lesson only exists because she finally stopped trying to force him to learn it. She stepped away from the role of emotional caretaker, and in doing so, she created the space for him to confront his own reflection. And whether he uses that clarity to grow or lets it harden into regret, that becomes his responsibility, not hers. The irony is that by releasing him, she returns him to himself. And in that return, he either becomes the man he should have been with her or spends years wishing he had. When a woman finally lets go, the final shift that happens, the one men feel the deepest, often long after the relationship has ended, is the realization that she didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because she cared too much for too long without receiving what she needed in return. And that difference is enormous. When a woman walks away with anger or resentment, a man can tell himself a story to protect his ego. She was too emotional. She expected too much. She changed. But when she walks away quietly, with acceptance rather than bitterness, it dismantles every protective story he relied on. It becomes almost impossible for him to label her as the problem. Instead, she becomes the mirror he can't look away from. That kind of departure carries a weight men don't forget. It isn't dramatic. It isn't vindictive. It's simply the moment she chooses herself. And that moment, though she may underestimate it, often becomes the catalyst for a man's deepest emotional reckoning, because he knows she didn't leave to punish him. She left to save the part of herself that was slowly being drained. This is where the psychological impact settles in. Men are conditioned to believe they have more time than they do. They assume they can take slow steps toward emotional commitment, that they can delay effort until they feel ready, that someone who loves them will wait indefinitely. When she lets go, that illusion shatters. He has to confront the truth that time is not a promise, it's a window. And the window closes when someone decides their heart deserves better than waiting for him to catch up. There's also a subtle but powerful emotional imprint left behind. He doesn't miss her because she begged, because she argued, or because she tried to hold on. He misses her because she stopped needing him. And for many men, that is the first time they truly feel the loss. When she was still trying, he could believe that he still mattered. But the moment she no longer asks, no longer hopes, no longer reaches out, that's when he feels what she felt all along, the gap between what the relationship could have been and what it actually became. Over time, this gap becomes a story he replays silently. He starts to remember the things she did without asking for anything in return. The emotional stability she offered, the encouragement she gave, the way she made him feel seen and capable. And this reflection becomes sharper, not in the beginning, but much later, when he meets people who don't bring the same presence, the same warmth, the same depth. He begins to understand that love doesn't just happen. It's earned through effort, consistency, and emotional responsibility. And he realizes, often too late, that she was willing to build something real with him, but he wasn't willing to meet her halfway. But the most profound part of this entire dynamic is that her letting go isn't about making him regret anything. It's about reclaiming her power. When she stops trying, she teaches herself that her worth isn't defined by someone else's willingness to appreciate it. And that is the lesson she carries forward, while he carries the memory of what he lost. So the takeaway is simple and deeply important. When someone shows up fully for you, don't wait until their silence becomes the loudest thing you've ever heard. Because once a woman truly lets go, her absence doesn't just change the relationship, it changes who you become in the aftermath.